welcome to another episode of Engagement That Scales with Rachel Happe. Good morning, Rachel.
Good morning, Shannon. Happy Friday.
Happy Friday.
Snowing.
It is snowing.
Boston. Very exciting. Just got rid of my summer stuff. But today, more importantly, we have Perry Hewitt on the line with, I was going to say on the phone. That shows my age. It's not the phone. It's not the phone at all. But welcome. I'm so excited to talk to you because, there's just a lot to talk about. How have you been doing and what have you been up to? And welcome.
Thank you, Rachel and Shannon. I've watched a few episodes of the show and it's terrific to be on it. Great cast of characters. You know, I've been up to a bunch of stuff. I've really taken a bit of a portfolio approach with my career these days, thinking about the mix of digital strategy and transformation, marketing for brand and product, and digital product development. But sort of underpinning it all, which was my great opportunity at Harvard, is the ability to spot and find new technologies and say, how's this going to change behavior? How is this going to improve organizations? Where is this an incremental win and where is this a seismic shift? So
I love that. I have a new product development background, so it was all about balancing portfolios anyways, on the innovation side. But I think one of the benefits, I think we don't celebrate generalists enough these days. And I think that so much is happening in so many little pockets of the organization, both incrementally and seismically, as you say, that if you're not taking a portfolio approach, it's so easy to just get blindsided by something that's happening. So I think that's fabulous.
I'm a little bit the Harvard Business School joke about the fishing village of my career. Do you know that joke?
Don't know that joke.
Harvard Business School guy goes to a guy, his mid-40s and says, what do you do every day? He's a fisherman. Well, I get up in the morning, I go out and fish a little bit. I come home, have a little siesta with my wife, if you know what I mean. And then in the afternoon, I repair my nets. And the next day I do it all over again. The Harvard Business School guy says, look at all these people who are unemployed in the city, in the village. You can employ them all and buy more boats. And then we have 20 boats. And then you get the revenue coming in from those, and explains the whole thing to him. And then you can retire. And the guy, he said, what do you want to do when you retire? He goes, I want to get up in the morning, fish a little, have a little siesta with my wife. I sort of feel like if my career goal was to work with smart people solving interesting problems at the intersection of marketing and technology, it's working out pretty well.
It's awesome. And actually, not that I would say it's exclusive, but I've been having this conversation with a lot of women in my age bracket and older right now who are I don't need to optimize financial success. I want to optimize getting what I need financially, but then having interest, doing something meaningful and interesting and not making myself crazy in the process and having time for everything else in my life that is interesting.
Yeah, that's the best case scenario. Sometimes I find I'm just making myself crazy wearing 3 different hats in for-profit, not-for-profit.
Sure.
But it is, you do get to see the wins across. And for me, I just turned 54 last week. A lot of it's about sort of mentorship and connection to the next generation of women and hopefully being a better female role model than I had some wonderful female and male role models that I'm very grateful for in my career, but trying to be the best one I can be at this stage, and at a time in which we're looking a lot at the culture of work and social injustice and
leadership in general.
Yeah,
is changing in some exciting and some predictable way. I mean, there's a tension between that conversation that's happening.
Your essay, you had a good quote. It was modestly confident and something else, about authentic leadership. What does it mean to be authentic? And I think
it's really hard for some. It actually, it's something that's been on my mind a lot because I'm a politics major. And so the core of politics has been immensely helpful in my career in all sorts of ways. But how we negotiate value is very driven by power dynamics. And power dynamics get confused a lot, meaning people confuse structural power with influential power, and socialized power all the time. Like they either ignore one or they they kind of dig into one or both. And it's really interesting, which actually gets a little bit into the conversation that I want to have with you, which is a lot of this is related to tech. And if you talk to the IT crowd or the tech crowd, I have found over the years that a lot of the time they really ignore the social influential power, and they're really looking, they're so bounded by structure because of IT. Like, they're literally, databases are very structured things, that when I see them approach problems, they're approaching the problems like a jigsaw puzzle. And they're kind of like, well, A fits into B, and B fits into C, and C fits into D, and so this should all work. And I can hardly access how they can't see that process needs to be negotiated by people who are absolutely not as logical. So talk to me a little bit about like what you've seen over the years between that tension between tech and people.
It's a challenge on, I would say, the adoption side as well as on the security side, right? You do see that IT mindset, which, gets us great systems built and is very methodical and important to have in an organization, diss on IT. But I think when you think about digital strategy and digital transformation, how you get people to adopt it, so much, a user is not a user is not a user, right? So much is about who can be your, early adopters, who can be your steadfast users, who can be your champions and advocates throughout the organization, and dividing people not only by a hippo perspective, the highest paid person's opinion, but think about what other perspective, like who are the nodes in your network who have the most quiet influence. It might be the EA to the COO. It might be the most friendly help desk guy you have. It might be the head of sales. You don't know who the people are who are going to be the powerful drivers for your digital behaviors. The other thing, and on the downside risk, it does make me laugh, the number of organizations I work with who are like, update your password every 60 days. Here's 10,000 articles on why that's not effective, but that's ignored. The 365 overlords have spoken. You will now, so I dutifully see people back in the before times when you went, people with their passwords, when Post-its attached to their monitors because they've had to change it again and they want to make sure they remember it. And you think, we're overlooking the people component. When Twitter got hacked this summer, I believe it was a 17-year-old using social engineering. It wasn't someone cracking in to the database CSI style, 17.
Yeah. Well, so it's funny to me running a small consulting organization because some of the time we literally can't collaborate with our clients.
Yeah.
And so what happens is they either use personal phones or I've used third-party vendor communities to transfer large files because the process is so arcane to get a PowerPoint over to them or out of them. And you're like, that's not secure. That's not a good practice. And yet we have to get work done. So so there's that real tension between those two that fascinates me.
And the growth of, different kinds of networks. I mean, one of the best pieces of advice I think I read in HBR and was lucky enough to practice in my career, especially for women, is to have colleagues in different industries, not only in different companies, but in different industries to bring you different perspectives about work challenges and to find adjacencies. I think is a really important benefit. And I think the modern IT structure, it has a hard time taking that into account. I remember when I joined Ithaca from Harvard, I first came to New York City about 5-6 years ago, and someone said, I said, oh, my colleague X will help me with that. And they said, they don't work here. And it's a very senior person. And it's like this idea of who's your colleague and how do you collaborate and how do you get things done, I think is a lot more fluid. Of course, we want to be mindful of all information security and protect our systems, but how do you take that into an account? It's not always an easy challenge to solve.
Yeah, I mean, I was just reflecting on this because we've got the CR network, which is hundreds of members across all sorts of organizations doing similar work. We just wrapped up our what's usually an in-person conference that we ran over the month of October. And I was thinking about some of our more active members, and I'm like, I really treat them like colleagues in that the CR network is a community of practice. And when I have questions about how something is happening or how to approach something that I don't have a firm idea of the right decision, I escalate it to them. And so that's happening a lot more because it's enabled by like time and space have been effectively demolished. And so how do we do that? And then it has these broad implications on legal and IP in that, you know, when you work that way.
Right. When you think about customer co-creation, right? We've been talking about it for years. I'm sure that's a core foundation of, you know, why you organize these communities. But when I think of it on the for-profit side, you know, investment opportunities through broad capital, you know, deals we're looking at, you know, what is the role of the customer in creating some of these products or platforms? And the not-for-profit side, interestingly, sometimes there I see more reticence of we know best. I think it's taking that curve toward inviting the customers and the community into the conversation. Some takes a little longer on that side.
Yeah.
And trying to figure out how to help all these organizations advance by engaging people in conversation. But as you said, being mindful of IP and legal and what are the constraints.
Are you familiar with Angela Blanchard?
No, I'm not.
She ran a huge community foundation in Houston for years. And she they really took a strategic approach around appreciative inquiry, which is we don't come in and solve problems for the community. That's not our role. They need to solve their own problems, and they have the capacity to solve their own problems. What we need to do is support and empower the things that are already working really well so that they can use that to leapfrog into more success. And I find that a great model for some nonprofits, just philosophically. I'm not even sure they had digital when they started that approach or now. I'm not sure digital is a big piece of it, but I have found that really helpful just in terms of mental models of like, it's not a transaction. We're not throwing something over the fence at people. That never works. So how can you, like, co-collaboration or co-creation is really the only solution to driving buy-in from the get-go and not spending as much selling, marketing, kind of pushing your agenda. It wipes out huge operational costs, but it's a mindset shift that is very hard to get around. And maybe that's the next question for you is, how have you worked with leaders on that mind shift thing? Because it's bigger and more tied to people's identity and really a tough nut.
Yeah, I think a lot is just surfacing the customer conversations that are going on with or without you is a big piece of it. You know, I think, and I do know many, whether it's community foundations or arts, you know, philanthropies, who do a ton of social listening upfront, engaging with the community to make sure that what is developed, particularly on public art, hits well. So I have seen that be a success. I do feel like suddenly around digital, sometimes it's just a little bit more gatekeeping, right? Like, we know best, we'll do this product for you or to you and not with you. So I think that's one of the areas to do it. So I would say the ways are, you know, surface specific examples. I mean, people love to say data-driven or data-informed decision-making. Excel is not always, you know, your greatest selling point. I think you have to ground your decisions in data. You have to have that in your back pocket. But often, what resonates is the story, right? The you know, the customer who couldn't find a way because the map wasn't optimized, or you know, components like, you know, different specific elements like that.
It's interesting because innovation background, it took me so long to figure out what design thinking was, because when I learned product management, I did it from a very anthropological perspective. That's how I learned to do product management. And so when design thinking came along, I was like, what is this? And then it was the anthropological perspective, and I was like, oh, but that's how you do product management. So like,
Exactly.
I didn't quite understand what was new about that.
But I do think we've retrenched a little bit. I do feel like we're a little bit emerging from a slough of, sort of trough of disappointment, where for a while, digital was the neat and bright and shiny thing, maybe 2007 to 2012, and social was emerging and people were spending, and you could see data like you could never see before. You could see Facebook growth, you could see all these things. And as it got more complex, ethically, practically, price, the whole inflation of video content, that whole pivot to video that was a pivot to a lot of money spent and not a lot of results. I feel like a lot of the disenchantment with digital really peaked around 2012 to 2014. And then you started to see a little bit of retrenchment of leadership of digital going back. It wasn't quite going back to the webmaster, but back to a little bit more of a silo. So
interesting, yeah. And actually what I'm seeing now, which is actually really encouraging from my perspective, is there's enough digital literacy in the business executives that you're seeing them challenge, might be the wrong word, but ask good questions, right? And be like, really, is that like, but that's not what we're really trying to get out of that. We don't just want to string the technology together. We want to solve a problem. And that is encouraging to me.
Oh, I agree. And I think, the idea of a digital center of excellence beyond, unless you're talking about hundreds of thousand mega corporations, to run experiments does not scale. What you want to do is increase the literacy of every line of business and provide them with the tools and technology to do it. But going back to your question of like, how do you shift the people? I think you tell them the stories, you back it up with the data, and you paint a picture of where you want to be. I feel like so much of the rise of marketing technology and marketing ops, which is a crucial and critical underpinning to all that we do, acknowledgement made. And I do see marketing ops leaders moving up to the CMO suite. I definitely am seeing that as a transition. I don't want to lose the storytelling around the brand, the storytelling around the product, what gets users excited, employees excited.
Yeah, I was actually, I got interrupted by another thought, but when I was doing product management, the challenge that I find when we do user research is that we don't do it in a way that gets at the feeling rather than the work that's being done, right? And the feeling is more important than the work, because what you're trying to do is you're trying to engage people's intrinsic excitement around something. You're not trying to solve every logistical problem, or more importantly, the logistical problem that they see, because they often can't see beyond where they're at. They can see the next change. They can see the one feature that's not working that they need to fix in a certain way, but they don't have the imagination to understand what technology could do that's transformative. And so you have to understand them deeply from here are my challenges and pains, and this is what drags my energy, and this is what really excites me. And then go back and connect that to what you know about develop. You can't just solve, I'm having this problem with like integrating this, that, and other thing.
Right.
Because you'll never get to the big exciting opportunities. Right. And I find that's a little lacking still in that digital literacy piece, which is we're not just trying to take a process, digitize it. Like that's incremental, that will help, but it's not the huge potential.
Yeah, the PDF to the web is always the first step, right? Let's replicate our org chart PDF and throw it up on the web. Now we have a website. And, I think there are tons of incremental initiatives like that cost, institutions tons of money and are a waste of time. That said, where are the ways you can be incremental and get people just on board with making changes, but also show them the future. So I'm obsessed with this idea that games and toys and things, people have long said the things that people found absolutely ridiculous and would never happen over the internet would happen. Like first it's a game, and then it's like how we all live. And that trajectory seems to just be in a minute. So I am interested in thinking about how do things like gaming transform, enterprise software? How does that make us think differently about how we engage with our customers from a marketing standpoint, how we build our products? And I think we're about to find out.
I would take it to the business model and say, how do we align intrinsic motivators? Mm-hmm. Because our entire organizational model and operations are built around extrinsic. Mm-hmm. Even marketing, like I want an advocate, I'm going to give you swag. Well, that's a short-term hit. Mm-hmm. They'll say one thing, two things, but that's not going to engage them longer term in a more sustainable way.
I push back on that. I'd say that good marketing gives you an identity that you want to align with.
That's intrinsic.
Intrinsic. Yeah, that's where, when I see good intrinsic motivational marketing, that's because, I'm a Honda driver. That's who I am. That's, that's baked in.
All I'm saying is if it's only about the swag and not about the intrinsic alignment, it's a quick hit. If it's about the intrinsic alignment and you add things that help people express that,
right,
that's a win. So it's really that alignment issue. And I don't think, and I see this on the internal side, where people are trying to engage employees. Mm-hmm. And I'm like, people who only are getting extrinsic rewards for their work will do the minimum.
Right.
I mean, and that's fine, sort of, but you're never going to get that like huge boost in productivity unless you excite them around something, which is what games do, right? Like nobody has to play a game.
Right.
Right. They draw us in. So how can you draw people in rather than like just giving them tit for tat?
Yeah. How can you pull them in and how can you make them feel, emotionally invested? Now, I'm not someone who's, work is your family. It should be your whole life. I think that's a road I'd never want to go down. Your family's your family. What you do to make an income. But we want to make it as meaningful and engaging as possible to challenge as much of you as possible. And ideally, what technology is doing is taking away some of the mundane tasks and, letting people think more about the higher order problems businesses need to solve.
And actually, to your point, I see a lot of people in the community space who are like, we need to create a sense of belonging and like have this be your home. And I'm like, no, you don't. Like I have a very complex personality and I have lots of interests. And if I can have a home for an interest that's part of my personality, that is sufficient. I don't have to be there 24/7. Like that's not what I want from a vendor, a product company. It's just never going to be what I want. And so having that realistic assessment of what you're striving for as a marketer too, like I feel like a lot of people are shooting too far, and that's also a problem, right? Because that doesn't speak to you.
Right. I think people, they've shown this time and time again in pay for grades. Like, right, should you be paying your daughter for B's or A's or, whatever she's shooting for? Like, it doesn't tend to work. But it is interesting to think about how engaging them like in a game might be more meaningful and not just, sort of meaningless medals and stars, although that works very well for my Peloton addiction. I will do anything for a badge.
It's interesting. I'm not competitive in the badge way, which is funny to be in the community space and be like that because it's used so often in the community space. But I was mentioning this before, my daughter's 10, right? So she's just getting into this whole digital world, and there is this massive multiplayer experience game that she plays called Star Stable, and it's all about horses and collecting horses. And I'm like, they have figured out the preteen mind of girls, right? Whereas for a long time, and she was really into Minecraft too. She liked some of the engineering games, but she doesn't like the shoot 'em up game. Like, she doesn't want the blood, violence, whatever. And so I think that scope is broadening to include more motivators or more personas, more people. And watching her play that is hysterical, because she plays it both with people she knows and people she doesn't know. So it's this mixed audience. And often she's also on an audio call with the friends who she's playing with.
Mm-hmm.
So it's like this complete, and I'll walk by her and be like, I don't know what's going on. Like, there's a whole reality there that is fascinating that I just can't wrap my own head around, even though I'm like in the digital space.
Yeah, sometimes when I see some of the language around job descriptions, you see now squad leader, taking on I wonder how much is gaming informed both the way we team and the language around teaming.
Mm-hmm.
And then I also think about, are the boys playing Grand Theft Auto or Halo or whatever is the game du jour, preference somehow over the girls playing Star Stable? Or are they all learning the same skill?
Yeah, and that's kind of an interesting, I'm sure Dana Boyd has some interesting takes on that. Because I see that even in the adult community world, is men and women tend to, not exclusively, but tend to communicate differently and want different cadences, and it plays a different role for them. And so no one approach to gamification necessarily works for a broad audience, which is something I think we have to be a little more cognizant of as well.
Getting back to the idea of women in networks and broadening our definitions of colleagues and how we orchestrate our software and our businesses to support that, I do think anything that encourages people to partner with different people for different skills and assume different hierarchies. Sometimes you're the boss because it's about being a sniper, and sometimes you're the boss because it's about gathering all the peonies, or whatever those skills are, I think is really interesting and important. I used to say back in the olden times that, you could tell a woman who played team sports because, there aren't many models, or at least when I was growing up in the 70s and 80s, for women to be competitive and make up afterwards.
Yeah.
For me to say, Rachel, I gave you that pass, you blew it, you idiot, I can't believe it, you cost us, and then have a beer afterwards.
Yeah.
And I feel like team sports is what did that in the physical world. And I do feel like this kind of collaborative, being able to be let down by someone and then support them is a really important skill to learn.
And actually that is in some respects the answer to the mindset shift, right? Is giving people experiences where they sit in different roles in the hierarchy that may not be their primary social structure. So the more you network across organizations and in different ways, the more plastic your mind becomes about who you are, what your role is, what power means. You just become more flexible in how you think about getting something done.
And where you can deliver the most value.
Yeah.
There are, deals I look at that involve complex financial instruments where I'm going to have a cursory, rudimentary knowledge. I'm not going to deliver the value there. But when you see the investment deck or the story they're telling of the product, or you're trying to suss out in the product, how much is actual technology versus how much is services and vaporware, that's my sweet spot. And I think if you figure out how to slot yourself in without automatically saying, I'm a foot soldier or I'm the general, that's a really important way to frame your career.
It helps you recognize your weaknesses with confidence too, because you don't have to. Like if you can partner, you don't have to be all things to all people.
Right.
And that is not only okay, but it helps co-create, right? Like by having a weakness, you build a relationship.
Right.
So this has been fascinating, and so many different tangents that I could spring off of. But we've got to wrap up. And I like kind of capping off with something that's been on your mind or you've seen this week that's interesting. I have something related to what I've been thinking about, but what's on your mind lately? What has grabbed your interest?
One thing I've really been interested lately is digital collectibles. This idea of, I've been looking a lot at NBA Top Shot and the idea of owning a moment of a player. I'm a huge basketball fan. And the LeBron James rookie card, the physical card sold for something like $1.8 million this summer. And how are people beginning to think about digital moments and holding them and storing them and showing them to others the way we might have done with baseball cards or stereo equipment or scrapbooks in another era. So I'm really fascinated by this emergence and, what it means. Will it take off? And what role does blockchain play in, verifying an authenticity? So.
And that gets me thinking about curation too, because there's just so mind-boggling. So curation becomes a really important, valuable piece of that potentially too.
And sharing, the ability to, have a marketplace in which you buy and sell these collectibles, but also just talk about them. Community, engagement.
They're a social object. Yep. Yeah, absolutely. The thing on my mind is the Drucker Forum is going on, and I've kind of kept an eye on it the last 5+ years, whatever. It's where management thinkers come and talk about the future of management. And for a couple of years, I had a lot of FOMO about this would be great to go to. And the last couple of years, I've been like, it's the same old club, same old power brokers, lecturing everybody on how things need to change, but not actually including the people that do things really differently. It's just interesting to see what's coming out of that and how exclusive that remains, and how again, it's a little bit of the mechanistic mindset of, well, we know all the right building blocks. And so therefore, if we put all the right building blocks together, you can be a leader while ignoring the power relational economic differences that exist amongst different groups. And so if you're coming at it from that perspective of you just need to collect the right building blocks and put them together, you're just further blaming people who can't put the building blocks together and be successful, and not even seeing the issue there. And so it's a blind spot that I see, because most of the people discussing it don't have that issue, so they don't even see it. And it has to do with privilege and underrepresented groups and all of that. But it's just something on my mind of how can we be more inclusive? How can we bring in the people who actually know how to get stuff done when they have no power or no structural power?
And when will the market pay for that? I mean, that to me is the question. It's not, these panels don't get put together by accident. People know where the demand is. So how do you shift perception and demand for something that may be more challenging, less marquee? And I think this is a challenge. I mean, digital transformation is a huge challenge for all elite brands, right? It's the gradually and then suddenly. If you're at the bottom, whether that's of the top tier conferences or educational institutions or museums of art, you felt that tension really early on. But the higher you get, the bigger the brand, the more you have to keep your eye on the ball. And people will keep buying. A small subset will keep buying and keep paying for that premium experience. But look at the demographic shift coming.
Yeah. So that's a great part to end. I don't have an answer to it. You probably don't have an answer to it exactly. But it is as things get more transparent in the world, the one thing that still isn't very transparent is that power piece of, okay, when I say something and when you say something, that's two different impacts. Not because one or the other of us is better. We just have different networks and different audiences and different people who are influenced by us. And in our case, not bad or good, but that understanding is going to be increasingly important. And I think it's lacking in a lot of spaces right now. So Perry, thank you so much. Have a wonderful weekend. I hope it doesn't snow in New York the way it's snowing in Boston right now.
Thank you so much, Rachel and Shannon, for putting this together. It's a real privilege and great to see you both. Next time in Austin.
Yes, absolutely. Or skiing, because I'm about to get my skis out.
Take care. Bye-bye. Thank you.